So ladies and gentlemen, DC fans out there, as we get closer to the release of Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which will mark the final movie from the 10-year-long DCEU, it's time to discuss the biggest ways in how James Gunn's new DCU will differ from that of the old DCEU. And also, will these new ways as I'm putting it, grant success to DC and where they've been pursuing a connected cinematic universe success for a very, very long time now. And also, just to put this out there, before anyone says it, no, this isn't me pitting two universes up against each other, nor putting James Gunn against Zack Snyder or anything like that. Plus, also, Zack's approach to the DCEU only lasted for so long anyway, if you think about it, given that the remainder of movies after his departure just attempted to salvage some form of momentum, if you want to call it that, which could never really, truly find its footing to become that truly flourishing cinematic universe that Warner Brothers desired, and are now giving it another stab with that of James Gunn's new DCU. So let's get into exactly what those reasons are. Give this video a like if you do go on to enjoy it. I'd really appreciate that, and consider subscribing for more DC updates, news, reviews, and breakdowns just like this. So number one, first off, is just story and approach, and letting things cook until they're ready, which may sound to you like, how's that a big point, Boba? You know, letting things cook until they're ready, and the story and approach to all of it. Well, believe it or not, you may or may not remember this, but in the DCEU, things weren't always cooked until it was ready. They were kind of pushed out the front door. But the whole approach to this new universe from Peter Safran and James Gunn is that it will be a lot more carefully prepared compared to that of the approach Warner Brothers allowed Snyder to have in the very early days of the DCEU. And all while Snyder, and I do want to put this on the table, very much so had his plans, starting with Man of Steel and then going into Ben Affleck's Batman with Batman versus Superman and what was going on there. A lot of you should remember, if you're kind of brand new to this fandom, that there was quite a bit of studio meddling back in the day, and we quickly saw a situation of Warner Brothers throwing it all into the deep end, basically forcing the DCEU to run before it could walk. The whole classic comparison to wanting to catch up to what the MCU was doing at the time, and not really orchestrating and just maturing out the universe to build up this potential that it could have had in a much more organic way. So with DC Studios being its own separate standalone production entity and studio, James Gunn has spoken extensively about how critical his careful approach to constructing the new DCU is, even saying that storytelling is 100% king and the focus here. He goes on to say that we're not going to overextend ourselves at DC. We're going to be very careful with the product that we put out and making sure that everything is as good as it can possibly be. So not only letting things cook and put it out when it's ready, but even the very foundations of mapping out this whole plan for storytelling going all the way 8 years, 10 years into the future of what stories this DCU could be telling on the cinema screen at that time, or on the Max screen, I guess you could say, because we can't forget about how there's going to be Max series and everything else. They brought in a whole writer's room to help flesh all of that out. Once again, to just hammer in that structure of the new DCU, and so that it remains cohesive and mapped out with multiple heads coming together to make sure that it doesn't dart all around the place in a way that just quite simply doesn't fit their plan. Now, Gunn has gone on to say as follows: people have become beholden to dates, to holding dates, to getting movies made no matter what. At the end of the day, I'm a writer at my heart, and we're not going to be making movies before the screenplay is finished. And if that means our plan has to shift a little bit, it's going to happen. We know it's going to happen because we're not going to be making movies and putting hundreds of millions of dollars into a film where a screenplay is only 2/3 of the way done, and we still have to finish it while we're making the movie. I've seen it happen again and again, and it's a mess. I think it's the primary reason for the deterioration in the quality of films today versus 30 years ago. So as a result of that, and I know as well, I want to say words are words. We need to wait to see this happen, but I do want to give props to, well, at least on paper right now, everything is like, okay, this way, hopefully we won't be getting any moments in where directors and writers are put in situations like David Ayer's Suicide Squad or Zack Snyder's Whedonized Justice League, and where things are just totally chopped up, directions are changed, not being faithful to that of the actual director's vision. We're just going in with a fully completed script and sticking to that, just circling back to Gunn's claims of a cohesive and story being 100% king approach is what the new DCU needs. And I do think if you go back in time, because this is kind of comparing it to the old DCEU, right? Sure, we had a somewhat foundation of story in the Snyderverse or just the overall DCEU at the beginning, but it was rushed, it had studio meddling, it was kind of forced out there before it was even ready. We've had other people come out recently saying it truly was trying to run before it could even walk, and then as time went on, they were just trying to get a win here and there whenever they could. Sure, we had a Shazam movie and then eventually a sequel to Shazam, but it was still like, what is going on here? So next up with number 2 is just this overall pool of projects that we've had revealed from the Gods and Monsters Chapter 1 DCU roadmap, and just how the DCU will have a variety in tone in a way we just didn't see done before in the previous DCEU. Granted, there were different tones. Clearly, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, or the first Shazam, isn't the same as Batman vs. Superman. But let's go all the way back to the beginning of the DCEU, because clearly, if things in another life would have gone a different way, Snyder probably would have kept on making his movies post-Justice League, would have done Justice League Part 2 and everything like that, and it would have maintained this overall vibe, because we can't forget that the DCEU started off with Snyder's darker tones with Man of Steel, and then going into BVS, and then eventually Justice League. So on top of all of this interconnected storytelling that we just spoke about in point number 1, the new DCU will also provide a lot more tonally distinct projects from the get-go, like right from the inception of the universe, attributing each movie's character to the tone that fits them according to the very comic books that they came from. James Gunn even went on to say with this that it's important to point out that in these stories, although they're interconnected, they're not all tonally the same. Each set of filmmakers bring their own aesthetic to these films, and the fun is seeing how these tonally different works mash up in the future. Everything doesn't always have to look the same. Everything doesn't always have the same expression. Different artists bring remarkably different looks, feels, and tones. This is not the Gunverse. So examples of this, of course, is that all while the DCEU will have the shining bright light of James Gunn's new Superman legacy, we're going to be obviously going into, well, before that, Creature Commandos, which I'm sure is going to be a very wacky, bizarre adventure with that team. Then we'll also be investigating the dark origins of Swamp Thing through what's being described as the prism of horror, which just sounds freaking amazing. Yet all while, as Gunn has referenced through what he's learned through the MCU, is that it just wasn't exciting when movies were tonally the same. Going on to say exactly that, what was exciting was when you had something like Guardians come out and everyone was like, how is this raccoon going to be dealing with this god of thunder? That's going to be weird. Then expanding on that by saying that they're one-upping that approach with Swamp Thing. So I don't know if that means we're going to have Swamp Thing hang out with Crypto the dog in Superman Legacy, or I don't know. I mean, maybe, maybe not, but still, imagining Swamp Thing through the prism of horror mixed with a character or one of the characters like Mr. Terrific or Guy Gardner or even Superman himself, I think is going to be just like what we read from the comic book panels brought to screen. And I can't really have imagined that in the former DCEU. Maybe if it would have carried on and found its success along the way and they just kind of seemed to embrace one-off movies that were still technically a part of the same universe. But if they really found their stride in that, maybe that could have happened. But again, with the new DCU, all of this is planned to have characters intersect and cross over through Max series, animated movies, even video games to, of course, actual films. So I can't wait to see that potential. James Gunn's reason for wanting tonally diverse movies as well is because he feels that this is what has dampened the idea of superhero fatigue in people's minds. I've talked a lot about superhero fatigue before and how I do think it is a semblance of a real thing, but it isn't necessarily superheroes, because there are movies that come out that are superhero based that still do very well in the box office. What is really giving this illusion of fatigue is other things that the superhero genre is doing. Not just unique to the superhero genre, but also just spectacle movies overall. With Gunn even going on to say that they've gotten too generic. There's this sort of middle of the road type genre / tone that so many superhero movies have, as opposed to being very different genres. And having a DCU filled up with many different tonally diverse genres, I think will only be an amazing thing that, again, we didn't really get all too much of in the DCEU. All right, so number 3 with regards to the DCU and in comparison to the DCEU is that there's just more than a movie approach to this new cinematic universe. So yes, we're not only talking movies, which of course are gonna hopefully be fantastic cinematic experiences to see, starting with Superman Legacy in 2025, of course, but also we can't forget how one really cool thing about this is that there's going to be DCU Max live action series with Peter Safran saying this about Lanterns, for example. It plays a really big role in the main story that we're telling across our film and television. This is a very important show for us. So this just goes to show you that even though towards the end of the DCEU we started to get technically a DCEU series with Peacemaker, and I say technically because that's somewhat being self-cannibalized into a DCU continuity project with season 2, or technically season 1.5 with Waller. Apparently that is Peacemaker 1.5 according to James Gunn. I consider this quite another fairly large difference to that of the DCEU, because the DCU is going to embrace live action series in addition to movies, and also have them clearly, from what Safran said, some play interconnected important roles in the DCU's main story. And to be fair, some might not like that latest aspect of what I said there, as people don't like the idea of the whole required watching when it comes to the idea of, oh, so do I need to watch Lanterns to understand what's going on in the Authority? I don't think this is going to be the case for every single one. I do think Lanterns will be quite important, because that quote from Peter Safran saying it plays a really big role in the main story, that's not the only time that's been said. James Gunn said a similar thing with how they stumble across this ancient, terrifying mystery that plays a larger part of their overarching story in the DCU. But for example, Booster Gold, I can't imagine that's going to be absolutely, pivotal watching or required watching when it comes to seeing the next project in the DCU. But before I go on too much of a tangent there, it doesn't even end there. We also have DCU Animation, which will be canonical to the mainline DCU Max shows and DCU movies. So essentially, mainline characters such as, David Corenswet's Superman will be voicing his animated counterpart in whatever animated project he could be in the future. And then in the project after that, he'll be popping up as real live action David Corenswet Clark Kent again. That's one sense of canonical cohesion that is going to be really, really interesting. And it doesn't just end from movies to live action Max series to animated canonical DCU projects, but also canonical video games. So as for the video game front, we haven't really heard anything about it. We've heard things about, obviously, animation with Creature Commandos. We've heard things about Waller when it comes to live action series, Lanterns, etc. Films, of course, with Superman Legacy and whatnot, but nothing on the gaming front. If anything, there's mysterious games out there like the Wonder Woman game, which we've heard absolutely sweet feckle from for a long time. There's that Suicide Squad versus the Justice League. These games can still release because they can be labeled likened to that of, the Batman in an Elseworlds universe. So Elseworlds video games. This whole point with number 3 was just to mainly say, comparing that to the DCEU, and where, you technically got Peacemaker at the end as a live action series, they mainly just kept trying to greenlight a new project and hope that people turn up. Now you've actually got all the chips on the board with a strategy in place. You've got cohesion and canon across multiple different forms of media, from actual movies you'll see on the cinema screen to animated shows that you'll see on Max, or even TV shows and video games. So it is pretty crazy. I don't want to get overly ambitiously hyped right now. We're going to have to wait and see how it cooks, and hopefully DC or the DCU will be a success for us to see several projects into Chapter chapter 1, and hopefully it will be successful enough to go into chapter 2. But if they do succeed at this, it could be a really, really awesome way and massive difference to approach compared to what the DCEU did prior. Okay, so number 4 is just somewhat of the new status quo, if you will, of this new DCU, in where we're already entering it, hitting the ground running in this living, breathing world. So when it comes to just how previous universes have started, unlike the DCEU when it first kicked off with Man of Steel, it opened a whole new universe that didn't carry on any previous continuity. Whereas the DCU will technically not be hard rebooting, as traces do remain from the former universe. And if you're new here, bear with me here, with Gunn wording it as building upon what has worked and rectify what has not. So this is a bit of a weird one, as it will still mostly feel like a new universe. I shouldn't really need to state that. We've got a whole new Superman who doesn't have the backstory or canon continuity to that of Henry Cavill's Superman. It's completely new. Our Batman in the DCU, granted it's a while away, has a whole Bat family around him. It's likely 10 to 12 years into his Bat career. A very different Batman. We've had fairly recent reports in the grand scheme of things saying that the entire DCEU Justice League has been recast. So no Gal Gadot either, or Ezra Miller's Flash, and yet we will still have multiple former actors from the DCEU stay on as their characters in the new DCU. This includes John Cena's Peacemaker from the Peacemaker show, as well as Freddie Stromer's Vigilante, Viola Davis's Amanda Waller, who came all the way back to David Ayer's Suicide Squad, Sean Gunn's Weasel, and likely others from the Peacemaker crew. But I say all of that just because, yes, we're getting a few characters carry on, but largely everything will feel very, very, very brand new. But not only that, the main point of number 4's point here is that the new DCU will feel lived in, a world in where heroes already exist. Now, I do feel like we didn't get a full sense of that in the DCEU. And what I mean by that is, all while we had a Ben Affleck Batman who was technically a vigilante for a long time, when we had Man of Steel with Superman appearing to the world, it was a real shocker to the people of Earth that there was this literal flying Superman. Other things like Martian Manhunter, he was just hiding away. Earth hadn't really seen a whole lot other than Wonder Woman just kind of being sneaky throughout major historical events. Whereas the way to look at the DCU is that it seems as though it will be doing a lot of world building exposition from the get-go, and then more and more as projects go on. And as already mentioned, people in the DCU compared to the DCEU would have seen heroes and villains for quite some time already, like seeing a flying lantern or someone like Hawkgirl, or I don't know, more of the tech type Mr. Terrific, or just think about metahuman villains. They've already been out there. Like seeing Superman, I think they'll look at him as, oh my god, this is like the coolest soup/metahuman/hero because he's Superman. But they would have seen stuff like that probably going way back to the Justice Society in the Second World War. Now, that hasn't been confirmed, but that's just to give you an idea, and I hope they are confirmed, and that would be a cool prequel project, I don't know, sometime in Chapter 2. But my point is, the people of the DCU are like, okay, like another hero, cool. You know, I'm not saying that they don't care about it, but that is vastly, vastly different from the world of the DCEU that we saw, which I still found pretty cool how people beheld Superman and, you know, they explored what kind of power should Superman have in BVS. And I think that theme can still be explored in a world where heroes have already existed for some time, even before Superman. But it's still a larger-than-life, hitting-the-ground world and atmosphere that we're entering as fans. And it really makes you think what the new status quo is going to be from the very second we pick up with the camera panning over Metropolis City in Superman Legacy. Or technically our first peeks at this world in Creature Commandos, where we could already get quite a bit of exposition and God knows how many Easter eggs to other heroes and villains out there, even in that animated show. I really do feel like they're going head over heels to make sure that this is like a rich world with so much lore and historical context that we don't actually know right now, but it's going to be really exciting to see unfold. So number 5 is somewhat of an expansion on number 2 in this video, but not about tones, but it's about really propelling lesser known characters into the mainstream, and most importantly, putting characters first. So James Gunn said as follows: "One of our strategies is that we take our diamond characters like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and we use that to help prop up other characters that people don't know. Like what happened with Guardians of the Galaxy in some way. Like taking teams like the Authority, which I know is just a spectacular idea for a film that is a completely different take on superheroes because it's really connected to Superman. It's about to use those well-known properties to help lead into lesser-known properties." And I completely agree with that. I know right out the gate when Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters was announced, you had a lot of optimism about it, but you had a lot of people like, I don't know, and then you had a lot of naysaying, and, still said with good intentions. This is just how people feel sometimes. They saw some projects on there, and they were like, oh, this slate is kind of lame. Who's the Authority? I don't care about the Authority. But then you kind of have perspectives like this, and where it's like, well, think about Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, granted, you have another perspective added on that as well. The MCU was already very popular by that point, compared to the Authority only being a few projects into this new DCU. You can't exactly say the same, even though that could be true. Superman Legacy could be a hit, Lanterns could be a hit, and then before you know it, you're in the Authority. But the thing is, the Authority could still be very amazing. I do understand the apprehension from some fans being like, oh, what is this? But the idea of having massive characters like Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, and a big clue, even though James Gunn said not that long ago, saying, I never said the Authority were in Superman Legacy, but in this quote here, he says, the Authority, it's really connected to Superman. I think there is a bit going on there, and it does make sense to somewhat backdoor pilot the Authority themselves, the movie, in Superman Legacy, or have both of them tie in some way or another. And that way you can have characters like this become massively popular characters. Now, I can't guarantee that, but imagine a world in where the Authority was amazing, and then you're like in 2 to 3 years time really excited for the Authority 2. I don't know, but the same thing applies for like what if Creature Commandos is really cool, and then we see some of those characters go on into live action. Right now, with the current projects that have been announced, all 10 of them, that is less than half than what is even yet to be announced to complete Chapter 1. That doesn't even include all of the Chapter 2 projects that are yet to be announced. So who knows what other characters they're going to try and propel up through the main Diamond characters. But this still isn't the main part of the point here. Not only are they trying to propel future and hopefully future popular characters out there in the DCU, they're trying to get across to everyone that they are really caring about the characters in this new DCU, and that is what should resonate with the audience most above everything else. And also, it seems to be something that a lot of films out there have somewhat forgot, and as a result, people don't get as connected to the movies, and you have some studios or whoever's controlling said products or movies wondering why. With James Gunn saying here that they aren't thinking about why is this story special? What makes this story stand apart from other stories? What is the story at the heart of it all? Why is this character important? What makes this story different that it fills a need for people in theaters to go see or on television? There's a lot of spectacle films made, and they have just gotten really generic and they've gotten boring, and they aren't about characters and there's no emotion to them. There should be emotion in things no matter what. That should always be there, some type of emotion. I'm not saying it can't be really light. I'm not saying it can't be really heavy. I'm saying that there should be some sort of emotion. And I think a lot of people will have faith in James Gunn there with how much he's made fans, probably yourself, care about his characters in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and how he will apply that core focus of character, not only character, but propelling them front and center, but also having emotion, a reason to care about these characters in the movie beyond just the reasons why he loves Superman and Lois Lane or whoever anyway. He will always focus on that over that of spectacle. Sure, these movies will have spectacle in it, but he will never forsake that for, hey, let's just get, and this is what he means by steering away from the spectacle, saying some movies have got generic out there. Now, we may be a fan of Fast and Furious, so we may be a fan of this, that, and the other, but you have to admit, you do go to those movies expecting to see a big clusterfuck mess of a spectacle time, right? And it's entertaining. But you wouldn't really always say that they have the most in-depth aspect of substance there for characters. So imagine if you try to blend both of them with just as much concentration, what you get out of that. And you guys have seen movies with examples of that, whether that's a Guardians of the Galaxy movie or something else, I don't know, insert your own suggestion here. But the fact that James Gunn is gonna make it his main mission to make sure every movie or TV show or whatever project it is in the DCU has that core focus of character and emotion because people then care about it. I think it will not only make people care about the most popular characters even more, but also about characters that weren't even on people's maps previously because of the new characters that we're going to be getting in the DCU. Which I know some of you will be like, I don't care about them. I don't think I will care about them. But what if you do actually eventually end up caring about some of these old comic book characters that you might not know so much about that are coming to see the light of day in this new DCU. Now, of course, guys, a lot of this is, of course, talk. We need to see James Gunn and Peter Safran with their new DCU walk the walk as well. But through what has been said so far, in my opinion, it is a vastly more organized and fleshed out mapping of a new cinematic universe for DC, of which, if they just stick to what's being promised here, I do think it could be awesome. I do think it's got quite a few trial and tribulations to go. I think even if they put out a good product, there's going to be that initial, like, oh, I still don't care about it vibe from some people. But hopefully, if tried and tested and proven and word of mouth gets around, as well as just decent ratings and reviews, people will, over a period of time, warm up and actually see what the new version of DC and their new cinematic universe from DCEU to DCU really is, and how it is distinct from what came before, and how what they are trying to do now is very different. And if they practice what they've been preaching, and they really, really, really do follow through with that, I think it's just a matter of time before even some of the biggest naysayers out there might be like, well, shit, like, I can't deny what I'm seeing there is pretty good. But, like, it's going to take a lot of proving for that to become a reality. And rightfully so. But from what I'm hearing, these are 5 big differences from the DCEU that I think whatever the next DCU iteration was going to be, it needed these things. And let's hope that they cook very good in the background and the fruits of their labor does come to fruition in the best way that pleases us fans. So let me know what you think of the 5 points that we went over today. Let me know what you think the most important factor is. What are you most excited for? What is your biggest change that you just think, this is what I've kind of always wanted? But yeah, I'm going to stop rambling now, guys. I just wanted to put a bit of bonus content out there as things slowly get back to normal now that the SAG-AFTRA strike is over. We should be getting more news any week now or any day now, to be honest, from James Gunn with Superman Legacy castings and other projects just over the horizon, maybe for the Batman Part 2 and whatnot. So if you're enjoying this content on the channel, maybe consider subscribing. If you aren't subscribed already, double check. Maybe today is the day I get that subscription from you, and hopefully you enjoy that future content. Like the video if you did enjoy it, of course. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you people of the DCU in the next video. Goodbye.